Okay, we're going to talk about respecting the silhouette. Let me show you what I mean about that. Let's go to the good old days of charcoal and paper. Okay, so when I draw something, that's a silhouette. It's just a shape. Silhouette's just a fancy name for shape. The easiest way to draw shapes, I know, is just with line. And we can draw those two-dimensional shapes, silhouettes of a two-dimensional shape. And when I'll draw it a little darker so that you can see it. I like to draw several lines. Now, as I'm drawing this line, I can compare it to see if it's in the right relationship to that line and this line. As I draw all of these, I'm thinking about where I'm going to put this line. As I draw this line, I'm now comparing it to where it needs to be in relationship to the other line. I can make corrections. If I draw it nice and light, I can do all that and render right over it, not have to even erase. So I like to use that lots of lines. Now I've just drawn 5 or 6 bulging boxes rather than just one. That's more intense practice. And I'm taking in the whole thing. As I draw each of these things, I'm taking the time as I get into the groove of drawing that. I'm comparing it to everything else and not just drawing all 4 sides and not really seeing what I created, just going on to the next 4 sides and so on. So it's a more efficient way to level up because you're immersing yourself and trying to take in the whole solution to a step-by-step process rather than just following the steps and never really paying attention to the last step as you go on to the next step. So that's a silhouette. Now, we realists, one of the problems we have is the more we look, the more we see. We've got great eyes for detail. So the more I look at something, I'll see simple silhouettes and I'll start to see a more nuanced silhouette. And then I'll see simple color, and then I'll see more variations of color, subtle variations of value as the form turns a little or a lot in that subtle or dramatic light lit environment. So the more we look, the more we see. And what happens is oftentimes this. So I'll draw a nice shape, and then I'll draw a nice series of values in the shadows and a nice series of values in the light. And I'll be looking pretty good. And then I'll have more time. And I'll start seeing these subtler forms and subtler values in the background, and subtler forms and subtler values in the foreground, and subtler in the shadow, and subtler in the light. And all of a sudden, what was a nice simple silhouette, when I add all the nuanced detail, whether it's super loose and painterly like this or highly detailed, oftentimes it all kind of smudges together. And it actually looked better when it was just this or just that, because at least everything over here is simple and everything over there is simple. So if we want to make sure the silhouettes do their job, we either need to leave out the detail or we need to manage the detail, and either one is a great solution. So what we see, let's see here. What we see most powerfully, most dramatically, is simple shapes and simple values. So the biggest bang we can get for our buck is draw really dark lines to separate all of the shapes from each other, all the body parts from the other body parts, all the foreground for the background, things like that. But the most powerful separation is when we separate things in value. We use the shapes to control the values. And let's see here. There's usually two things we want to pay attention to. The foreground against the background. And we might have a very dark background against a very light foreground. Or we might have a very dark foreground against a very light background. Or we might have a full range of value in the foreground and some more limited range of values in the background, or vice versa. Oops. We might have a full range of values in the background and a very limited range in the foreground, whatever that range is. Those are your four choices to separate foreground from background. When we sketch, we usually don't even worry about that. The background is a non-background. It's a void. It's like one of those Hollywood movies where somebody goes to heaven, they go into a white room with white walls, and it's just all white because it's the gateway to heaven. And there's no background. There's no environment. But if we want to get more bang for the buck, then we're going to add some light source, and the more dramatic the light source, the better. And so then we want to separate not only foreground from background, but light from shadow. So the shadow of the egg on the shadow on the table, with the front plane of the table in shadow, and the background in shadow, I can look at everything that as either light, because it's catching light, or dark, because it's catching shadow. And separate things strictly on whether they're in light or they're in shadow. And that'll give me quite a bit of form. Not everything, because the shadows of the foreground, the shadows of the background are all, and the shadows of the middle ground in this case, are all the same value. And so are the lights maybe. So we can combine both of those to make a full tonal composition. Figure out how I want to separate light from shadow, how I want to separate light from shadow, how I want to separate foreground from background, and go from there. Excuse me. We are just going to worry about the light and shadow today. We're going to go with the heavenly environment, just because it's easier. So here's usually the process. I'm going to do a sketch on a pad here, or a sketch on a canvas. And just separate that little head study in oil from the white canvas or the tone canvas, a non-environment. But what I am going to probably do is do strong separation of light from shadow. So here's how that works. And notice the effect. So if the light is coming from up and to the right, I have a slightly bulging form, there's a fair chance I'll have a slightly bulging shadow. If that form bumps against the next slightly bulging form, I'll have a slight bump between the next bulging shadow. Like so. Boy, I might have a slightly binding spine, like a shotgun barrel, separating. And I can go through this however it's happening and drop everything, all of this thigh, good chunk of this left cheek to separate light from shadow. Now, if I have a little more control of my materials, let's just finish this off. If I have slightly more control of my materials, I might create a soft edge between and it might be very soft and quick, or it might have a little bit of a fuller gradation to it. Might take a longer time to blend back out. Either one. Any detail I want beyond that, I'll just use line. Like so. And with a little bit of practice, I want to separate the hip from the leg. A little bit of practice, I can do a better and better job doing that. But I start to get the idea fairly quickly by thinking of things simply as light and shadow. And I can do that with any body part. And I can do it in a more painterly way, quicker, sketchier way. And get pretty quick results. And anything that's not a contour, I don't worry about. Anything that drops into shadow, I don't worry about in terms of detail. Probably will. And just soften those edges. I can come back and erase if I have too much gradation, that kind of stuff. I don't do any detail. Or if I do, the detail is just line. Just line in there. And as I practice that, I'll get better and better and better at it. So I'll get used to the materials, and then I'll start trying to create better constructions. This is something close to what I did for my other live stream just a few minutes ago. I'm going to draw the simple shapes, simple structures. Simple shapes, two-dimensional. Or simple structures, three-dimensional. Notice if it's three-dimensional, I break the contour. not just show you how to move around the form, but how to move across and specifically over the form. If I can show you in construction or in rendering how to move over the form, now we're going to, in other words, if I can somehow break the contour, make sure that's on, yeah, it's on framing. Make sure we're also streaming, good. If I can somehow break the contour, not just go around the form like a shadow, but show you how to move over the form in constructed line or rendered detail. Now we're going to feel that three-dimensional, which is the tilting into the picture plane, not just leaning or facing across the picture plane. And then if I can understand that, how that form turns away from the light source or turns back into the light source, then we're going to be in pretty good shape, literally. So let's just do something real simple here. I want to explain how this happens. That would be, I've done it before, and that would be another longer lesson on how to build shadow shapes. But let's just assume we have that skill here. And oftentimes I'll just let that blend right into the background. So I start to get a little bit of a environment of a dark background, like a Rembrandt or something. It's a quick way to show a little bit of a foreground background relationship without having to fuss. And then again, any details I can just do in line. And if I get a good shape of that body part, or a good constructed form of that body part, and then get a good shape of the shadow on that shape of the whole form, a silhouette of shadow that fits on the silhouette of light, which together makes the whole silhouette of the foreground structure, then we're rocking. So let's just do this. Just lay something in pretty quick. As I practice, I'll get a little better at drawing the shapes, a little better at drawing the shadow shapes, a little better at creating a soft edge between those light and shadow shapes, and so on. I can add a little further sense of the environment by, maybe drawing a little cast shadow in there. Sitting on a box, whatever. And I'll get better at that as I go. Drawing just line. In the details. Like so. And I can keep practicing that simple process over and over again. Simple doesn't mean easy, but I want to keep it simple. And when I'm having trouble with a more complicated object, I'll go to more simplified objects and practice my process there to get better. So we do that, and we do a great job, pretty good job, work in progress job. Feel like it's getting better, but I still know I need to work with it. And then I start adding details. And I notice that this blends out here. Are we doing on time? Going quick. I'm feeling a little bit of the ribs. A little bit of the latissimus. The obliques. The sacrum. Gluteus medius. And the gluteus maximus. Trapezius and the erector muscles. The reflected light. And what we'll start to find as we go along there is what originally was nice and simple now starts to get a bit of a mess. When I first did that figure, I had this very simple shape of a form with a simple shadow shape on the form. And I simply let it get lost into the background. If I decided I want a little bit of background, and I simply softened the edge. So it had a sense of rendering without putting all the hours and hours and all the rendered detail. And I got it fairly quick. And then I spent the next 2 hours, 42 hours, turning it into that. And I just simply used line to describe detail in shadow or detail that separates the lit foreground from whatever was going on in the background. So what I want to do is understand that there's a ton of details to be had here. But I want to pick the right details and leave out everything else. The biggest possible shapes. The rib cage is just a big tube or egg or a squished ball for the hips or a shotgun barrel down the spine. Understand that really simply. Maybe not even split the two sides of the glutes, the butt from one cheek from the other. Super simple. Understand it at that level. And then if I do choose to put all that detail in, make sure all the detail I put in is either linear or really subtle. So I can have all that detail and more in the shadow, in the background, in the lights, in the shadow. But I want to make sure at first and even maybe second glance, I just see the shadows as one big monolithic value. And then the more I look, the more little details I see. But when I squint, I lose most or all those details. I could add all sorts of lines or tones, but I'd make them really subtle. And same way with the light side. I can put all the detail I want in there. But let's ghost this detail back. So it doesn't, the little things don't take away from the big thing or big things. Or if I do put strong detail, like a cast shadow of the arm across the lats, or the bind of the armpit for the arm, or the separation of the shoulder from the tricep. Then I'm going to put that strong detail at the edge of the silhouette. I can put plenty of strong detail at the beginning of the silhouette of the form, or the beginning of the silhouette of the shadow on the form. I can do strong values, strong mark making at the edges of those silhouettes. But I want to get rid of the detail or just play that detail down a bunch. I can have that detail. I still feel the shoulder blade, but I ghost it back. Still have that little sense of that rib cage separating, base of the rib cage binding against the obliques. The obliques, a bit of a little egg there, a bigger egg for the hips, but I have them hug the edge of the whole structure or the edge of the shadow structure. So all this mark making is hugging the edge. It's all here. It's not migrating into the center, doing it all, whatever it is, painterly, nuance, subtle details, but stronger here. And then it gets subtler and subtler as it moves in the middle, so it doesn't destroy the silhouette. And then you can always come in and decide to pick something in the middle and decide it does deserve a strong statement. Let's just do this so it's quicker. Maybe that shoulder blade and structural muscles of the shoulder girdle does get strong, maybe super strong, but not everywhere, not all over the place. And then the other strategy I'll use to give it seemingly more complexity is I'll do a gradation, a little or a lot, and gradate some detail and even painterly detail into the hips, but all the hips, into the waist and lower rib cage, but all of it on the far side of the torso that's farthest away from the light. And again, any detail that starts to break away, other than that smooth transition or that painterly transition of a big gradation, I'll make more subtle. But if it's at the contours or close to the contour, I can go a little crazy, get lots of stuff. Then every once in a while, I'll decide something that comes in deserves to be a little stronger, a little less ghosted. And I'll make that a quite strong mark. See how that works? So respect the silhouettes. Get rid of the detail that destroys the body of the shadow, or get rid of the detail that destroys the body, the unity of the lights. Or put as much detail as you want in there, but have that close to or hugging the silhouettes, so it doesn't disrupt the edges of the silhouettes, so it doesn't disrupt the center of the silhouette and looks like a bullseye that grabs our attention, and it makes us look at the little thing and not the big things. And or put a broad gradation to help make more subtle those lesser details, or blast it out to make more subtle those lighter details. And that's the strategy you'll see sergeants use, this is kind of a sergeant-y kind of technique, and pretty much all the other realists. You'll see them all use this. Thayer and Bouguereau, Ang, big time, all those things. So anyway, that's a strategy. Hope that helps.